Nix Vang always said he was born under a bad star, which, considering the stellar cluster he called home, wasn't much of a stretch. The fractured Dyson swarm hanging like the universe's largest disco ball over the planet of Ravana glittered with promises of power and doom, depending on where your allegiances lay. Nix preferred the company of cards over crowns, and if that meant his luck was perpetually stuck in a cosmic toilet flush, so be it. As he sat at a rickety table in the rusty nebula, nursing what passed for whiskey in these parts, Nix watched the game unfold with the detached interest of a man too used to losing. "You sure that's a legal move?" he drawled, eyebrow quirking at the burly miner across from him. "Legal's just a suggestion round here," grunted the miner, revealing a hand that would make a saint swear. Nix chuckled, tossing his cards onto the table. "Looks like I'm donating to the Feed a Minor Fund again," he said, sliding his remaining credits across the table. "You lot eat more than a black hole on a buffet day." Around him, the bar thrummed with the kind of life that suggested everyone was trying hard not to think about the impending doom hanging over their heads. The Dyson swarm had been a marvel once, a symbol of human ingenuity. Now, its fractured state mirrored the political chaos below. "Nix," a voice called from the shadows, the kind that could have belonged to a simpering villain in one of those low-budget holo-dramas. He turned to find Arlo in glee leaning against the wall, a smirk plastered across his sharp features. "Still throwing money into black holes." "Some habits die hard," Nix said, pushing away from the table. "What do you want, Arlo?" Arlo gestured with a flick of his wrist, a gesture that said "follow me if you dare," and led Nix to a corner booth. "I have something that might interest you," he said, sliding a data pad across the chip's surface. "Something big." Nix eyed the pad, then Arlo. "Last time you said that, I ended up in a cell on Braca 7 with a bounty on my head the size of a small moon." "Underappreciated moon," Arlo corrected. "And you're still alive, aren't you?" Nix sighed, curiosity outweighing his better judgment, which, to be fair, was never that great to begin with. "All right, spill it. There's chatter." Arlo's voice dropped, the volume barely audible over the raucous laughter of a nearby table. "Galactic Cold War kind of chatter. Warlords, empires, the whole shebang." Nix snorted. "Aren't we always in a Cold War? You're gonna have to give me more than that." "All right," Arlo said, leaning forward, eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. "Word is those warlords. They've got strings attached. Someone's pulling them from a distance, a hidden empire using economic sanctions like a puppet master." "Economic pressure, good luck with that. Most warlords have the financial sense of a drunk polka player," Nix replied, though his mind was already racing through the possibilities. "Exactly," Arlo said, tapping the data pad. "But this empire's smart. They're not just using credits. They are manipulating resources, trade routes, entire economies. It's insidious, quiet, deadly." Nix's eyes narrowed. "And you think we can get a piece of this action?" Arlo shrugged. "Information is currency, Nix. We find out who's pulling the strings, maybe we cut ourselves a little profit." "Or a noose," Nix muttered, though he was intrigued despite himself. The fractured Dyson swarm loomed above them, a constant reminder of humanity's reach exceeding its grasp. Nix couldn't help but feel a certain kinship with it, both dangling precariously on the edge, both in desperate need of a good fix. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. A slow grin spread across Arlo's face. "We get close, dig into the dirt, and try not to die." "Well," Nix said, draining his glass. "Can't say you don't make it sound tempting." They left the rusty nebula, stepping into the neon-lit grime of Ravana's streets, a place where hope came to die, and dreams had long since given up the ghost. The Dyson swarm's broken light flickered above, casting irregular shadows that danced across the cracked pavement. "You know," Nix said, as they dodged a puddle that looked suspiciously sentient, "sometimes I wonder why I hang out with you." "The charm, obviously," Arlo replied, eyes scanning the street as though expecting the hidden empire to pop up and offer a friendly "how do you do." "Or maybe I'm just a masochist," Nix said. All right, let's see where this rabbit hole leads. Their first stop was a dive at the edge of the district, a place where the bartenders had more metals in their faces than a planetary refinery. The kind of place where questions cost extra and answers were usually accompanied by a punch to the face. Charming, Nix muttered as they ducked into the dim interior. The smell keeps the amateurs away, Arlo said, waving a hand in front of his nose. Now, who do we need to talk to? They approached a figure slumped over the bar, a mountain of muscle with a face that looked like it had been used as a punching bag one too many times. Hey, Bolts, Arlo said, slapping the man's back with the kind of recklessness that usually ended in a brawl. Heard you've got your ear to the ground. What's the word on puppet empires? Bolts turned slowly, eyes narrowing as he focused on them. Arlo in glee, he rumbled, voice like gravel. And the scrawny one. That's Nix to you, Nix said, offering a grin that was more bravado than cheer. Bolts grunted, a sound that could have meant anything from hello to I'm going to enjoy stomping you into paste. Why should I tell you anything? Because, Arlo said, leaning in conspiratorially, we're the best chance you've got of keeping Ravana from becoming another pawn on someone's cosmic chessboard. And because, Nix added, I've got a face you can trust. Bolts snorted, which Nix took as a win. Fine, he said, draining his drink in one long gulp. But if this gets me killed, I'm haunting you both. Wouldn't have it any other way, Nix replied, clapping the man on the shoulder. Bolts leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. There's a group calls themselves the Syndicate. Quiet, deadly, but they've got their fingers in every pie from here to the outer colonies. They're pulling strings, setting up trade embargoes, collapsing economies. It's one hell of a game they're playing. Nix and Arlo exchanged a glance, the kind that said, well, this just got interesting. And where do we find these Syndicate folks? Nix asked. If I knew that, Bolts said, I'd be a lot richer or a lot deader. Nix nodded, filing away the information for later. Guess we better start looking for some bread crumbs. As they left the bar, Arlo clapped Nix on the back. See what I tell you? Nix shook his head. Yeah. Just remember, if we end up in a cell again, you're buying the escape plan this time. They made their way back into the night, the city's artificial lights flickering as if in silent laughter at their predicament. Somewhere out there, forces moved with the grace of 1,000 chess masters playing simultaneous games, and here they were, a pair of mismatched pawns dancing across the board. The night's chill bit into them as they headed for the next lead. The fractured glow of the Dyson swarm above flickered uncertainly, like a promise that might just be kept if they squinted hard enough. You ever wonder, Nix said as they ducked into an alleyway, if maybe we're not cut out for this hero business? Arlo laughed, a short, sharp bark. Probably, but who else is gonna do it? Fair point, Nix replied. Still, if we end up saving the universe, remind me to get a t-shirt or something. I'll make sure it's a nice one, Arlo said, eyes already scanning the shadows for their next lead. They moved deeper into the city's underbelly, where deals were made, and lives were lost with the flick of a wrist. Here, amidst the grime and the grit, Nix couldn't help but feel oddly at home. Maybe it was the familiarity of danger or the fact that no one cared if you were a hero or a crook as long as you paid your tab. As they approached a suspiciously familiar contact, Nix sighed. All right, let's see what fresh trouble we can dig up. And so, with the specter of the Syndicate looming over them and the fractured Dyson swarm as their only witness, they plunged headfirst into the chaos once more. After all, in a galaxy where nothing was ever as it seemed, a gambler and a strategist might just be the universe's best hope, or its next big mistake. Nix stared at the blinking neon sign above the door, which flickered like it was powered by the hopes and dreams of the patrons within. Perpetually dim, occasionally brightened by a flash of desperation. The Quantum Flush, it read, a name that promised excitement but usually delivered disappointment, much like every politician he'd ever met. Another day, another dive, Nix muttered, stepping inside with Arlo on his heels. The interior was a cacophony of lights and sounds designed to part fools from their money. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol, sweat, and the particular tang of despair that seemed to cling to every gambling den in the galaxy. "You'd think they'd spend some of their ill-gotten gains on a janitor," Arlo remarked, sidestepping a stain on the carpet that might have been older than the building itself. "Maybe they did. Janitors probably lost everything at the craps table," Nix replied, scanning the room. The place was packed with every kind of lowlife Ravana had to offer: smugglers, miners, off-duty mercenaries. All of them united by a single commonality: the Empire's influence. It was the Empire's invisible hand that controlled the dice, and by extension, the entire damn table. Arlo nudged Nix, gesturing towards a table where a particularly loud game of quantum poker was underway. The players were a mix of species, all yelling and gesticulating as if they were trying to win an argument with the universe. "There's our mark," Arlo said. Nix squinted through the haze, recognizing the gambler at the center of the chaos. "Trekka the Unyielding. They say he's got more luck than sense. I hear he used to be a lawyer before he figured out gambling was more honest." Arlo chuckled. "Must be the only lawyer who ever found more integrity in a casino." They approached the table, Nix nudging aside a spectator who looked like he'd been pickled in whiskey. Trekka glanced up at them, his beady eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you two want?" he growled, his accent thick enough to spread on toast. Nix flashed a smile that was part charm, part warning. "Just looking for a game where the odds aren't stacked like a politician's promises," Trekka snorted. "Good luck with that. The Empire's got every table in this city rigged tighter than a miser's purse strings." "That's what we'd like to talk to you about," Arlo said, sliding into a seat. "We've got a proposition." Trekka folded his arms, his interest piqued despite himself. "I'm listening." "We're looking to introduce a new kind of game," Nix said. "Something unpredictable, something the Empire can't control." Trekka raised an eyebrow. "And how do you figure on doing that?" Nix leaned in, lowering his voice as if they were sharing the galaxy's worst-kept secret. "By playing to human nature. See, most of these games. They're designed with algorithms that predict patterns. The Empire loves order, control, but humans, we're chaos incarnate. We thrive on unpredictability." Arlo nodded. "Imagine a game where the only rule is there are no rules. Cards change value mid-hand, dice with more sides than an abstract artist's interpretation of a polyhedron. No algorithm can predict it because even the players don't know what's coming next." Trekka rubbed his chin, considering. "Sounds interesting, but what makes you think it'll work?" "Because," Nix said, grinning, "we've already tested it, gathered a few of the brightest and drunkest minds we could find, created a prototype, if you will. It's the kind of chaos even the Empire's algorithms can't handle." Trekka chuckled darkly. "So, you want to turn the Empire's own game against them. Not bad. But there's a catch, right?" "Always is," Arlo said. "We're gonna need a little startup capital, to grease the wheels, and we figured someone with your luck might be interested in getting in on the ground floor." Trekka tapped his cards against the table thoughtfully. "You're crazy, both of you, but hell, I've always liked a good gamble." Nix clapped him on the back. "That's the spirit. We'll make a pirate out of you yet." As they made their way to a back room to hash out the details, Nix couldn't help but feel a spark of optimism. It was rare, fleeting, and probably a symptom of early-onset insanity, but it was there nonetheless. Maybe they really could throw a wrench in the Empire's grand design, or maybe they'd just end up flat broke with a new collection of enemies. Either way, it was bound to be interesting. "Think this'll work?" Arlo asked quietly as they walked, his voice barely audible over the din. Nix shrugged. "Who knows? But at least it's better than sitting around waiting for the Empire to crush us under its boot heel. Plus, if we pull it off," Arlo added with a sly grin, "we'll be heroes. Or the next best thing, rich." They reached a secluded corner of the casino where they could speak without fear of eavesdroppers. Trekka joined them soon after, his curiosity clearly outweighing his caution. "So, what's the next step?" Trekka asked, settling into a threadbare chair that looked like it had seen better days, possibly before the last Galactic War. "First," Nix said, "we need to test this game in a real setting." See how it holds up against actual players. Then we get the word out. People love novelty, especially when it comes with a side of sticking it to the Empire. Arlo leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the gamble. And once word spreads, people will flock to it. They'll want in on the chaos, the unpredictability. It's the kind of thing the Empire won't see coming because it's based on everything they can't understand. Human nature. Trekka grinned, a wicked gleam in his eye. If this works, it'll turn the entire gambling scene on its head. The Empire will either have to adapt or watch as their control slips through their fingers. Exactly, Nick said. And while they're scrambling to catch up, we'll be raking in the chips, or at least causing enough trouble to keep ourselves entertained. Well, Trekka said, standing up and extending a hand, I'm in. Let's see where this insanity leads. They shook on it, sealing the deal with a handshake as binding as any contract in the galaxy. Nix felt a familiar rush of excitement, the kind that came with a high-stakes game where losing had consequences that could be measured in years rather than credits. As they left the casino, Nix turned to Arlo. You know, if we pull this off, we're gonna be legends. Or dust, Arlo replied, ever the optimist. Either way, it's a hell of a story. They walked back into the night, the fractured Dyson swarm casting its broken light across the city. Somewhere out there, an empire moved with the slow, methodical certainty of a glacier. But here, beneath its notice, a small band of rebels plotted chaos with the kind of reckless abandon that only true gamblers possessed. They spent the next several days perfecting their game, enlisting the help of a few trusted friends, mostly drunks and card sharks with more loyalty than sense. They tested and revised, tweaking the rules until even Nix couldn't predict the outcome. Finally, the night came for their debut. They set up shop in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place that had once housed industrial equipment before falling into disrepair. Now, it was home to their grand experiment, and possibly their last stand. The room buzzed with anticipation as players gathered around makeshift tables, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Nick stood at the center, feeling like a ringmaster about to unleash a particularly unruly circus. Welcome, one and all, he shouted, waving his arms for attention. Tonight you're part of something new, something unpredictable, a game where anything can happen and usually does. I present to you Quantum Chaos, the crowd murmured, intrigued despite themselves. As the first hands were dealt, Nix watched with bated breath. The game was as chaotic as promised, cards changing value mid-hand, dice rolling in ways that defied the laws of probability. The players quickly found themselves at sea, their usual strategies rendered useless by the sheer unpredictability of it all. And yet, amid the chaos, a strange thing happened. The players began to adapt, to embrace the madness. They laughed, cursed, and gambled with abandon, reveling in the sheer insanity of the experience. Arlo sidled up to Nix, a satisfied grin on his face. Looks like they're having fun. Yeah, Nix replied, watching the scene unfold. And more importantly, they're winning. The game's designed so anyone can come out on top if they're clever or lucky enough. Trekka appeared beside them, his expression one of awe. You mad bastards might actually pull this off, Nix chuckled. We might yet, and if we do, it'll send a message. We won't be controlled. Not by the Empire, not by anyone. The night wore on, the warehouse filled with laughter and the clatter of dice. News of the game spread like wildfire, drawing more players, more chaos. The Empire's grip on the gambling dens began to loosen, their carefully calculated odds rendered meaningless by the madness of quantum chaos. As dawn approached, Nick stood among the players, feeling a rare sense of accomplishment. They'd taken on the Empire, not with guns or ships, but with wit and unpredictability. It might not be the kind of victory that made it into the history books, but it was theirs. And in a galaxy where the odds were always against them, that was enough. Here's to chaos, Arlo said, raising a glass in a toast. To chaos, Nix agreed, clinking his glass against Arlo's with a smile that suggested, just maybe, they hadn't been born under such a bad star after all. The first hint that things were about to get complicated was the crowd. Quantum Chaos wasn't just a game anymore. It was the hottest ticket in Ravana. Word had spread faster than a cheapskate's tips, drawing in a motley assortment of gamblers, hustlers, and those simply curious to see what all the fuss was about. The crowd was as diverse as it was loud, with accents from every corner of the galaxy bouncing off the warehouse walls like a chorus of drunk space parrots. Nick stood near the entrance, greeting the players with a grin that barely concealed his surprise at their number. "Welcome, welcome. Step right up to the only game in town where the odds are as unpredictable as a politician's promise." Arlo, leaning against a wall with practiced nonchalance, surveyed the bustling room. "Looks like we're drawing a crowd," he remarked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I always said we should get into the entertainment industry." Trekka, who had taken to his role as a silent partner with surprising enthusiasm, nodded toward a particularly well-dressed group milling about. "Got some high rollers tonight. Words getting around." Nix followed his gaze and frowned. "Yeah, and with high rollers come high expectations and complications. Like paying taxes," Arlo quipped. "Or explaining to the Empire why half their gambling revenue's gone missing," Nix replied dryly. As if summoned by the mere mention of the Empire, a new figure stepped through the door. He was tall, with that intangible air of authority that only comes from a lifetime of making other people do what you want. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail with the precision of a cybernetic hawk. "Zer Quell, Empire operative, professional party pooper." "Who's the stiff?" Arlo asked, nodding toward Quell. "Trouble," Nix muttered. "The kind that doesn't go away with a good drink." Quell approached with the kind of confidence that suggested he was used to people stepping out of his way. Nix felt a faint stirring of unease but smothered it with a smile that he hoped suggested far more calm than he felt. "Evening," Quell said, his voice smoother than a smuggler's alibi. "This the infamous quantum chaos I've heard so much about." "None other," Nix replied, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that was both welcoming and slightly defensive. "Care to try your luck?" "It's not my luck I'm interested in," Quell said, his smile as sharp as a vibroblade. "It's yours." The tension in the air was thick enough to slice, but Nix had been in his share of tight spots before. "Luck's a funny thing," he said, his tone light. "One minute you're on top of the world, the next you're flat on your back wondering what hit you. Or who," Arlo added, earning a glare from Nix. Quell chuckled, a sound that held more ice than warmth. "I've been sent to evaluate this phenomenon. Seems it's causing quite the stir in Empire circles. We aim to please," Nix said cheerfully, "or at least disrupt the status quo." "I'm here to ensure it doesn't become a bigger problem," Quell said, the threat wrapped in casual dialogue like a razor in silk. Nix met his gaze steadily. "We're just offering a bit of entertainment. A break from the monotony of Empire-regulated everything." "Very philanthropic of you," Quell remarked. "But the Empire prefers to keep its citizens entertained under its own terms." "We're not exactly the terms and conditions type," Arlo said with a shrug. "More the see-what-happens variety." Quell's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. "I'll be observing for now, but understand this is your opportunity to show that this game is nothing more than harmless fun. Isn't that what gambling's all about?" Nix said with a wry grin. "Harmless fun with a side of crushing disappointment." Quell gave a non-committal nod and moved off into the crowd, leaving Nix and Arlo to exhale the breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. "Well, that was fun," Arlo said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "Yeah, like a root canal," Nix agreed. "We need to be careful. If the Empire decides we're a threat, they'll shut us down faster than you can say insurrection." Trekka joined them, his face a mask of concern. "That guy's bad news. You sure you want to keep this going?" Nix looked around the room at the players laughing, cursing, and reveling in the chaos they had created. "It's working, Trekka. People are challenging the Empire's control just by playing." "That's worth the risk," Arlo nodded. Besides, we can't back down now. If we do, it's as good as admitting defeat, Trek sighed. Then I guess we're all in. More like all screwed, Arlo muttered under his breath. They watched as Quell made his way through the crowd, his presence a cold reminder of the Empire's ever-looming shadow. But as the night wore on, players continued to flock to the tables, drawn by the allure of the unpredictable. And for every win or loss, they thumbed their noses at the Empire's rigid system, one bet at a time. As they moved among the players, Nix noticed an unusual figure at the far end of the room. The man looked like he'd been assembled from a kit marked generic troublemaker. Unkempt hair, a jacket that had seen better days, and a disposition that screamed mischief. He was leaning over a table, his eyes locked onto the game with a focus that suggested he wasn't there just for fun. "Who's our new friend?" Arlo asked, following Nix's gaze. "Another complication, I think," Nix replied. "Let's go introduce ourselves." They approached the table, where the man was currently losing to a woman whose expression suggested she was enjoying herself far too much. "Good evening," Nix said, his voice amiable. "You seem to be quite invested in our little game here." The man looked up, his eyes flicking over Nix and Arlo with the practiced ease of someone used to sizing up potential threats. "Just admiring the chaos," he said with a lopsided grin. "Name's Jax, and you two must be the masterminds behind this circus." "Masterminds might be a bit generous," Arlo replied. "We're more like ringmasters with a penchant for chaos." Jax chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "Well, whatever you are, you're stirring up all kinds of trouble. A lot of folks are interested in seeing where this goes." "And which side are you on?" Nix asked, maintaining a casual tone. "The one with the best odds," Jax said, his grin widening. "But seriously, I've got a proposition for you." Nix exchanged a glance with Arlo, equal parts wary and intrigued. "We're listening." Jax leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've got some contacts off-world. Let's just say they are not fans of the Empire. They'd be very interested in supporting your little rebellion here." "Support's nice," Arlo said skeptically. "But what's in it for you?" Jax shrugged. "Same as you, I imagine. A chance to stick it to the Empire and profit while doing it." "And why should we trust you?" Nix asked. Jax's grin didn't waver. "Because I'm willing to take the same risk. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't cross the Empire unless you've got nothing left to lose." Nix considered the offer, feeling the pressure of the decision weigh on him like a ton of space junk. If they accepted Jax's help, it would mean more resources, more reach. But it also meant drawing even more attention from the Empire. "I'll think about it," Nix said finally. "But understand, we're not in this to trade one master for another." Jax raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just a guy looking for an opportunity. Whatever you decide, I'm on board." They shook hands, sealing the deal with all the trust of two snakes in a pit. As they returned to the center of the room, Nix felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. The stakes were higher now, the risks greater. But that was the nature of the game they'd chosen to play. "Think this Jax character's legit?" Arlo asked, his tone skeptical. "Probably not," Nix admitted. "But sometimes you have to roll the dice and hope they don't come up snake eyes." "Speaking of dice," Trekka said, joining them with a look of concern. "Quell's been watching everything like a hawk. I don't trust him." "Join the club," Arlo said. "But we can't do much about it without tipping our hand." "Then we keep playing," Nix said. "We keep pushing the boundaries and we keep them guessing. As long as they're trying to figure us out, they're not shutting us down." With a nod of agreement, they turned back to the crowd, each step a gamble, every decision a roll of the dice. The Empire was watching, the stakes were rising, and as the players continued to revel in the chaos, Nix couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They were making waves, causing ripples in an ocean of order. It might not last, but for now it was enough. And as the night wore on, the echoes of laughter, curses, and the clatter of dice filled the warehouse. A symphony of rebellion played out one hand at a time. Whether they'd pull it off or crash and burn, Nix had no idea. But as long as they were rolling the dice, there was still a chance they'd come out on top. "Here's to the gamble," Arlo said, raising a glass. "And to whatever comes next," Nix replied, clinking his glass and savoring the moment. Because in a galaxy where the odds were stacked against them, sometimes the only winning move was to keep playing. The air inside the quantum flush was thick with smoke, chaos, and the faint whiff of desperation. Nix Vang looked over the crowd from his vantage point by the bar, half expecting to see someone spontaneously combust from sheer bad luck. The gambling den was alive with the sounds of clinking chips, the murmur of scheming whispers, and the occasional outburst of someone realizing they just lost everything but their shirt. And in one unfortunate case, even that. Arlo and Glee sidled up next to Nix, a glass of something vaguely toxic in hand. "I swear, the only real winner here is the guy selling these drinks," he noted, taking a sip and wincing. "Might be cheaper to just drink the cleaner fluid straight from the engine room," Nix smirked. "At least that way you'd forget all your troubles, and possibly your name." Trekka the Unyielding joined them, looming like a specter of legal nightmares past. "We're drawing too much attention," he said, his voice low enough to make a conspiracy theorist sound like an open book. "Attention's good for business," Nix shrugged. "As long as it's the kind that doesn't come with ankle bracelets or free long-term accommodations courtesy of the Empire." "Well, Quell's making the rounds like a politician at a fundraising dinner," Trekka warned. "And I'm not sure he's here to kiss babies. More likely to shake us down for spare change," Arlo snorted. The crowd was getting restless too. Rumors of economic unrest across the swarm had started trickling in, like a leaky faucet filling a sink of collective unease. People were on edge, betting not just for fun but from necessity, a last-ditch attempt to turn a handful of credits into something that could actually buy dinner. Nix watched as Zerk Quell, the Empire's answer to uncomfortable truths, maneuvered through the crowd with the ease of a knife through butter. His presence was a black hole, curling everyone else's mood into a tight knot of tension and dread. "Great," Nix muttered. "Just what we need. Out of the frying pan and into the vat of corporate-sponsored oppression." "Maybe we should have a nice chat," Arlo suggested. "You know, clear the air, stroke his ego, and hope he doesn't notice we're in over our heads." "Hope's a dangerous thing," Nix replied. "Almost as dangerous as whatever Jax is cooking up with his off-world pals." As if summoned by his own questionable ethics, Jax appeared next to them, grinning with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't deflect with charm or violence. "Looks lively in here," he said, eyes scanning the room as if sizing up the entire place for auction. "Business booming. Boom or bust, it's all the same around here," Trekka replied. "As long as no one's serving subpoenas, we consider it a good day." "Funny you say that," Jax replied, flashing a disarming smile. "Because I've got an offer." "Another one?" Nix asked, arching an eyebrow. "I thought we were still trying to figure out the last one." "This one's different," said Jax. "There's a faction, let's call them enthusiastic entrepreneurs, not too fond of the Empire's stranglehold. They're interested in a little cooperation." "Like business partners?" Arlo asked, cynicism dripping from every word. "More like co-conspirators," Jax corrected. "But that's just semantics, right?" Nix considered the proposal, the weight of Empire scrutiny a constant reminder that alliances were often as fleeting as the luck that ran this place. "I'm listening," he said finally, against his better judgment. Jax leaned in, his voice just above a whisper. "If you let them in on the game, they'd provide backing. More resources, less Empire interference." "Less interference," Trekka repeated, sounding skeptical enough to make a used ship dealer seem trustworthy. "Sounds too good to be true." "That's because it probably is," Arlo chimed in. "What's the catch?" Jax shrugged. "No catch, just a chance to disrupt the Empire's machinations. And maybe line our pockets a bit." "And what about Quell?" Nix asked, glancing over at the Imperial operative now deep in conversation with a group of high rollers. "He doesn't strike me as the type to buy into business opportunities." Jax's smile didn't waver. "Leave Quell to me. I've got a way with words and distractions." "Distractions, huh?" Nix mused. Let's just hope we're not the ones that get distracted right off a cliff. It's a gamble, Jax admitted. But isn't that what you love? Nix exchanged glances with his crew. They were already in the deep end. Why not see if they could swim instead of sink? All right, we'll give it a shot. But any sniff of a double cross and you won't even get time to say oops. Understood, Jax said, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Pleasure doing business. With that, Jax slipped back into the crowd, leaving Nix and his crew to consider just what kind of deal with the devil they'd just made. Trek crossed his arms, the lines of concern etched deeper into his face. I don't like this, he said. Join the club, Arlo replied. Next meeting's at midnight, bring your paranoia. Look, Nix said, we're in a tight spot. We need allies as much as we need air to breathe. If this Jax fella can keep Quell off our backs, it's worth the gamble. Or it's a shortcut to a cell, Trekka countered. Either way, Nix said with a shrug, we won't know until we roll the dice. As they spoke, the tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. The players were growing impatient, their frustrations boiling over into shouts and arguments. A sure sign that things were unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Seems like everyone's got ants in their pants tonight, Arlo observed. Or maybe they just realized the Empire's idea of fairness is as mythical as honest politicians, Trekka added. Nix nodded, taking note of a group of particularly disgruntled gamblers grumbling in one corner. We better make sure this place doesn't turn into a riot. Last thing we need is to give Quell an excuse to come down on us like a ton of bricks. On it, Arlo said, moving to pacify the crowd with the kind of charm only someone who'd never actually had to deal with a real riot could muster. Trekka stayed put, his expression a mix of resignation and resolve. Seems we're not the only ones with internal divisions, he commented, gesturing to a heated argument between a pair of players. Yeah, well, Nix replied, unity's great in theory. In practice, everyone's just out for themselves. Even us? Especially us, Nix said with a grim smile. But at least we know it. They watched as Arlo attempted to smooth things over, his words a balm to the crowd's frayed nerves. For now, it seemed to work. People returned to their games, and the threat of a full-blown riot receded into the background hum of the gambling den. As the noise settled back into its usual chaotic rhythm, Nix felt a cold prickle along his spine. He turned, finding Zerk Quell watching him from across the room, his gaze as intense as a laser scalpel. Before he could process this unwelcome attention, Quell was already making his way over, his authoritative stride parting the crowd like a knife through tension. Mr. Vang, Quell said, his voice as smooth as the artificial whiskey the bar served. Might I have a word? Nix forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, he replied. Though I should warn you, conversation's been known to lead to dangerous ideas around here. Quell's expression remained unreadable, like a brick wall with a sense of superiority. I've been observing your little operation, he continued, and there are some concerns the Empire has about its influence. Concerns, Nix echoed, feigning innocence. We like to think of it more as creative chaos. Chaos is rarely contained, Quell replied, and always destructive. Nix's grin widened, all teeth and bravado. Depends on your perspective. Some might say it's the best tool for change. Some might also say it's a fast track to anarchy. Quell's gaze didn't waver. And the Empire doesn't appreciate anarchy. Well, that's a shame, Nix said lightly. We were just starting to get the hang of it. Quell's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile. The Empire is prepared to offer you a deal. Nix's interest piqued despite himself. A deal? I'm all ears. Shut this place down, Quell said, his tone as final as a judge's gavel. In exchange, the Empire might overlook some of your past indiscretions. Nix laughed, a sound without humor. And here I thought you were going to offer me something tempting. Quell's expression hardened. Consider this your one and only warning. The Empire has tolerated this little rebellion of yours long enough. And if we refuse, Nix asked, his tone challenging. Quell's eyes bore into his. Then you'll find out just how far the Empire is willing to go to maintain order. Nix met his gaze, defiance burning bright. Thanks for the heads up, but I'm not much for taking orders. Quell's smile was cold. So be it, Mr. Vang, but remember every game has its end. With that, Quell turned and walked away, leaving behind a tension that clung to the air like a bad smell. Nix watched him go, his mind racing with possibilities and pitfalls. Trekka joined him, his concern palpable. That went well, he commented dryly. Better than expected, Nix replied. At least he didn't arrest us on the spot. For now, Trekka said. But what about later? Nix shrugged, a gesture of reckless resolve. Later's another game entirely. In the background, the noise of the gambling den continued unabated, a testament to human tenacity or maybe just sheer stubbornness. Either way, they were still in the game for however long it lasted. As the night wore on, Nix and his crew moved through the crowd, their presence a reassurance to some, a threat to others. They were dancing along the edge of a precipice, one misstep away from disaster. But in a galaxy where the odds never favored the gamblers, they chose to keep playing. Because sometimes the only way to win was to keep rolling the dice, embracing the chaos, and hoping that luck, fickle and capricious, would decide to smile upon them just this once. The quantum flush was the kind of place where life's losers and winners looked the same, mostly because everyone lost eventually. Inside, the air was thick enough to chew, with a mix of sweat, desperation, and dreams that smelled distinctly of cheap cigars and even cheaper ambition. Nix Vang stood by the bar, nursing what passed for vodka, which tasted more like engine degreaser. He cast an eye over the crowd, noting the tension skittering across the room like a rat with a death wish. Never seen so many people eager to part with their money, he muttered. Arlo in glee, leaning against the wall with a drink as luminous as a dying star, smirked. Guess they figured life's a rigged game, might as well play a rigged game. True enough, Nix replied, raising his glass in a mock toast to the inevitable. Except this time the stakes are breathing. The door swung open and in walked Zerk Quell, imperial swagger and all. Quell's presence was like a cold gust in a sauna, unwanted and bound to leave everyone feeling uncomfortable. Nix's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a social call. It never was. He could smell trouble like a dog sniffing out a buried bone. Quell approached with the confidence of a man who assumed the universe owed him a favor. Evening, Vang, he drawled, the words as oily as his demeanor. Busy night, Nix gave a non-committal grunt. Business is booming, and so are our problems thanks to your empire's lovely policies. Quell shrugged, his smile pure condescension. Just here to remind you that every stack of chips has a bottom. So does every operation. Is that a threat or a life lesson? Arlo asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. Call it a friendly advisory, Quell retorted, eyes flicking to the crowd like a hawk eyeing its prey. The Empire's patience is thinner than your margins. Nix exchanged a look with Arlo. The message was clear. Fun time was over and the Empire wanted their toys back. Great. Just when they were starting to enjoy themselves. As Quell strutted away, the lights flickered, a not-so-gentle reminder of the power shortages plaguing Ravana ever since the Dyson swarm went from a shining symbol of human achievement to an interstellar junkyard. Think Happy Empire days getting cancelled, Arlo quipped, taking a long sip of his questionable drink. Only if we're lucky, Nix replied, his gaze turning to Trekka, who was leaning against a nearby table, eyes scanning the room with the wariness of a soldier on hostile ground. Trekka uncrossed his arms, the movement deliberate like he might be concealing a weapon, probably because he was. Quell's more wound up than a cheap watch, he said, a trace of concern in his gravelly voice. He's got reason, Nix replied. The game's slipping and we're on the knife's edge, Arlo snorted. What else is new? We're always on the knife's edge, just means we're primed for a dramatic fall. You always know how to cheer me up, Nix mocked, tipping his glass before setting it down with a clink. But you're right. We've got a problem and it's got Empire written all over it. Trekka nodded, his eyes never settling in one place for long. Then we better make sure we're not the ones who get written off. The three of them gathered closer, their voices lowered to a conspiratorial murmur. The tension in the room was the least of their worries. Quell was the kind of problem that came with handcuffs and a short walk to a lonely cell. "So what's the plan?" Trekka asked, his tone suggesting he wasn't hopeful for a positive answer. "Run," Nick said, the simplicity of the word carrying the weight of their predicament. "We've got to vanish before the Empire makes us disappear." "Just like that?" Arlo asked, his face a mask of disbelief. "Leave it all behind." Nix leaned in, his voice grim. "If we stay, the Empire won't just shut us down. They'll make an example. And I like my head right where it is, thank you very much." Arlo didn't respond immediately, his eyes distant, as if looking at a future that might not exist. "Guess we're going then," he said finally, resignation in his tone. Nix nodded. "We'll slip out during the shift change at the docks. The Empire might control the outcomes here, but they don't own the whole galaxy." Trekka grunted in agreement, already mentally packing up whatever essentials he could carry. "Wouldn't be the first time I've had to disappear in a hurry." The trio melted into the chaos, their departure unnoticed amidst the noise and smoke. They knew the routine: covert exits, avoid eye contact, and don't trip over the inevitable drunk passed out in the hall. The streets of Ravana were no less oppressive than the inside of the Flush, with buildings leaning in like gossipy neighbors whispering about dark deeds. They walked with purpose, though every shadow seemed to hold an imperial spy ready to jump out and ruin their day. But they were good at this game, honed by years of practice and countless narrow escapes. "So," Arlo said, breaking the silence with the flair of someone who had just remembered the punchline to a joke only he found funny, "what's our next stop? Backwater planet? Maybe a nice asteroid with a view?" Nix cracked a smile despite the tension. "Anywhere but here sounds good." "Maybe somewhere where the local law doesn't come with stormtroopers." "Low bar," Trekka grumbled, his eyes scanning the alleys like a paranoid tourist. "The Dyson swarm could collapse completely and still be more stable than this place." They reached the docks without incident, a small miracle given their luck of late. The docks were a chaotic mix of shipping containers, half-wrecked ships, and a workforce that looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. It was perfect. Their ship, the Rusty Nebula, was a testament to bad decisions and worse repairs, but she was theirs, and she was home in a way Ravana never could be. "Hope she's got one more jump left in her," Arlo remarked, patting the hull as if trying to reassure it, or maybe himself. "She always does," Nick said, though his confidence was more hope than conviction. As they prepped for departure, the comms crackled to life, a static-filled transmission cutting through the noise of the port. It was a warning from the Empire, the broadcast voice smooth and sinister, listing names and descriptions that sounded all too familiar. "They're broadcasting us," Trekka said, his tone making it clear he didn't think much of the Empire's creativity in hunting fugitives. "Nice to feel wanted," Arlo quipped, fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "Let's give them a reason to remember us." As the nebula fired up, Nix took one last look at Ravana through the viewport. It was a sad farewell, like saying goodbye to a relative you never liked but felt obligated to visit. "Good riddance," he muttered, flipping the final switches as the ship groaned to life. The nebula lifted off with a judder, as if it too was reluctant to leave the gravity of desperation behind. But leave they did, cutting through the atmosphere like a knife through gristle. Stars spread out before them, a vast expanse of opportunity or danger depending on how you looked at it. "Where to?" Arlo asked, once they were free of Ravana's grasp. Nix considered the view the endless stretch of possibilities, someplace where the Empire's got less of a foothold. "Maybe we'll find some other enthusiastic entrepreneurs to join our little rebellion. Or maybe we just keep running," Arlo suggested, though the levity in his voice was forced. "They'll chase us," Trekka warned, his gaze on the nav screen, watching for Imperial pursuit. "Let them," Nix said, a spark of defiance lighting his eyes. "We've got the whole galaxy to lose them in," Arlo chuckled, leaning back in his seat. "And if they catch us, Nick shrugged, a gesture that encompassed everything they left behind and everything still ahead. We'll think of something. After all, legal's just a suggestion round here. With that, they shot forward into the abyss, the stars streaking past as if mocking the Empire's attempts to control them. Freedom was a gamble, and sometimes you had to bet everything on the roll of the dice. As the rusty nebula plunged deeper into space, Nix allowed himself a small smile. They were still alive, still kicking, and still playing the game on their terms. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For now. Nix shuffled the cards with the kind of confidence only desperation could bring. They'd barely escaped Ravana, and now he was about to gamble with the very devil himself, Zerquel. The room was dark, the kind of place that smelled of old regrets and even older booze. Perfect for losing yourself in a game no one should play. Quell leaned back, feet propped on the edge of the table, casual as a cat in a sunbeam. His eyes, however, were sharp, dissecting Nix with the precision of a surgeon who forgot to sterilize his instruments. "You sure about this, Vang? I'd hate for our little misunderstanding to end in tears." Nix gave a half-shrug, the kind that suggested he might just laugh in the face of death if it had a sense of humor. "Tears are for the living. Besides, I hear you've got a soft spot for reckless idiots." Quell smiled, all teeth and no warmth. Reckless, sure, idiots not so much. They were playing Quantum Chaos, a game that was part strategy, part luck, and all madness. The stakes were high. If Nix won, Quell would reconsider the Empire's squeeze on their operations. If he lost, well, best not to think about that. Meanwhile, back on the rusty nebula, Arlo was orchestrating his own kind of chaos. He was a maestro of mischief, fingers flying over the control panel like it insulted his mother. The goal was simple: hack into the Empire's financial mainframe and cause enough digital bedlam to make their withdrawal feel like a vacation. Trekka loomed nearby, the silent guardian of Arlo's shenanigans. "This is insane," Trekka grumbled, watching Arlo's work with the skepticism of a man who's seen too many plans blow up in his face, sometimes literally. "Insanity or genius," Arlo replied, not looking up. "They're two sides of the same coin. Just ask any scientist before they got institutionalized." Back at the game, Nix played his hand, movements fluid, masking the anxiety that coiled in his gut like a dormant snake. Quell watched, unimpressed, tapping his own cards together, the sound as irritating as a dripping faucet. "You play like it's your last chance," Quell noted, voice smooth and infuriatingly calm. "It just might be," Nix admitted, glancing at the cards like they held the secrets of the universe, or at least the key to his immediate survival. Quell threw his cards onto the table with the casual disdain of someone who rarely lost. "Your move, Vang." The chips clattered like bones rattling in a tomb as Nix considered his play. His mind worked overtime, calculating, second-guessing, praying to any deity that might still take his calls. Meanwhile, the rusty nebula's engines hummed with barely contained energy. Arlo hit a button with the flourish of a magician revealing an empty hat. "And we're in." Trekker raised an eyebrow which, coming from him, was like a standing ovation. "You actually did it, of course," Arlo said, grinning like a man who just shoved a pie in the Emperor's face. "Now, let's see them figure out where their credits are hiding." The Empire's financial system was a beast of its own, a snarling, labyrinthine monstrosity guarded by digital Cerberuses. But Arlo was good. He'd spent years playing games with systems that would make lesser hackers weep into their keyboards. This was just another level of difficulty. "How long before they notice?" Trekka asked, eyes flicking to the ship's sensors, always alert for trouble. "Long enough," Arlo replied. "They're not expecting a blitz, more like a slow siphon. By the time they figure it out, we'll be halfway to nowhere." Back at the table, Quell was looking a little less smug. Nix had pulled a move so audacious it would have made a gambler blush. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence thick with anticipation. "You've been holding back," Quell remarked, his smile now a thin line. "I prefer to think of it as strategic patience," Nix said, eyes locked on Quell's, a challenge in the stare. Or maybe I just like the look on your face when you realize you're not holding all the cards. Quell chuckled, a sound that held no humor. You're playing with fire, Vang. Don't forget who holds the extinguisher. Funny thing about fire, Nick shot back. It has a tendency to spread. The game continued, a tense dance of bluff and bravado. For Nix, the stakes were more than just chips. This was about carving out a corner of space where they could breathe without looking over their shoulders every damned minute. Arlo's fingers flew faster as alarms began to blare across the Empire's networks. Time was short, and if they were caught, they'd be lucky to end up in a cell. More likely, they'd be floating home in a body bag. Can you feel that? Arlo asked, eyes alight with the thrill of impending chaos. That's the sound of the Empire scrambling to keep up. Trekka didn't smile, he rarely did, but there was a certain satisfaction in his posture. Let's hope they trip over their own feet in the process. The room grew quieter as Nix made his final move. Quell's eyes narrowed, evaluating the board with the scrutiny of a hawk spotting a rabbit in the grass. It was a moment that stretched, weighted with possibility and the inevitability of consequences. Well, I'll be damned, Quell said, leaning back with a slow clap. You might have just pulled it off. Nix allowed himself a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sometimes you've got to roll the bones. As if on cue, Arlo's voice crackled over the comms. We're in the clear, at least for now. Ready to make a quick exit, Nix stood, gathering his winnings with a casualness he didn't feel. Looks like this is my stop, Quell. Pleasure doing business with you. Quell eyed him, a mix of respect and irritation. Don't get too comfortable, Vang. The Empire has a long memory. Good thing I have a short attention span, Nix replied, turning toward the exit without a backward glance. The rusty nebula was already humming with anticipation, a metal beast ready to leap into the void. Nix joined Arlo and Trekka on the bridge, the thrill of their narrow escape still pounding in his veins. Think they'll come after us? Trekka asked, settling into his seat with a familiarity that was almost comforting. Oh, absolutely, Arlo said, a gleam in his eye. But by then we'll be so far gone that they'll need a map and a miracle to catch up. Maps they have, Nix pointed out. Miracles. Not so much. As the ship soared away from the chaos they'd left behind, Nix allowed himself a moment of reflection. They'd won this time, but the Empire was like a bad rash, unpleasant, persistent, and likely to flare up when least expected. So what's next? Arlo asked, kicking back with the ease of a man who just robbed the galaxy's biggest bank and got away clean. Next we lay low, Nix said, watching the stars streak by. And when the time's right, we make sure the Empire remembers why they should leave us alone. And if they don't? Trekka's question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then we make them regret it, Nix replied, with the kind of calm that suggested he'd gladly go down swinging if it meant taking a piece of the Empire with him. Here's to regrets, Arlo toasted, raising an imaginary glass. The nebula carried them into the unknown, a trio of misfits on a mission that was equal parts survival and rebellion. Out here in the vast expanse of space, the rules were different, or maybe they didn't exist at all. Nix looked at his friends, his crew, his co-conspirators in this insane dance of survival. They were still here, still fighting, still playing the game. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And if the Empire wanted to make it a contest of wills, then they'd picked the wrong players. Where to next? Arlo asked, his voice deceptively casual as he scanned the navs. Nix considered the vast, glittering expanse of the universe before them. It was a wild frontier, full of danger and opportunity in equal measure. Somewhere we can catch our breath, maybe find a few new tricks to add to our repertoire. Just remember, Trekka said, his tone gruff but touched with a rare hint of humor, wherever we go, we bring our own chaos. Nix chuckled, nodding in agreement. And isn't that the best part? The rusty nebula surged forward, leaving behind nothing but the ghosts of past troubles and the promise of future adventures. For now, they were free, and that was enough. Maybe not forever, but for the moment it was everything. And we're off, Arlo declared, with the kind of bravado that only came from knowing they'd just gotten away with the impossible. Nick settled into his seat, ready for whatever came next. The universe was a big place, and they were only just getting started. The quantum flush was never known for its ambience, not unless your idea of ambience included sticky floors and the scent of desperation. Nick's Vang sat nursing his vodka, which had the unique quality of tasting like it had been distilled from broken dreams. He watched the crowd with the practiced eye of someone who knew that every face there was just one bad decision away from ruin. Nix had won his game against Quell, a victory that felt like flipping the bird at the universe. Yet, there was no time to bask in glory when the universe was trying to shove its boot up your ass. Quell, with his slicked back hair and a jawline that could cut glass, was already plotting his next move. Nix hated that kind of persistence. It reminded him too much of cockroaches. "Nice game," Arlo in Glee's voice crackled through the comms, his tone as upbeat as a hangover. He was tucked away in the rusty nebula, far from the action but close enough to pull strings. "You think Quell will pull his goons off now? If he doesn't, we'll just have to remind him that he's not the only one who knows how to play dirty," Nix replied, scanning the room for exit routes, habit really from a lifetime of needing one. Meanwhile, on the ship, Arlo leaned back in his chair, feet propped up like he was on vacation. "Trekka and I have been keeping busy. Hacked into the Empire's financial system so hard, they're gonna think twice before they try to put the squeeze on us again." Trekka loomed behind Arlo, arms crossed, his silent presence a testament to just how seriously he took this whole doom and gloom shtick. "I still say you're crazy," Trekka muttered, skeptical as always. "Crazy's just genius that forgot to take its meds," Arlo countered, tapping a button that made the nebula hum like an overfed cat. "Besides, if the Empire falls over a few missing credits, they deserve whatever's coming." As the tension buzzed between them like an electric current, a hush settled over the quantum flush. It wasn't the good kind of quiet, like when you find out your ex got food poisoning. No, it was the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, whispering that trouble was lurking in the shadows. Nick stood and began moving toward the exit. "Time to blow this joint," he muttered, half to himself and half to anyone who might care, which, judging by the faces around him, was no one. "Arlo, warm up the engines. Trekka, keep an eye out for unwanted guests." "You got it, boss," Arlo replied with the kind of enthusiasm that could only come from someone who loved chaos a little too much. As they made their way out, the patrons of the quantum flush went back to their own dismal tasks, trading what little hope they had for a chance at something better. In a place like this, hope was the first casualty. Nix quickened his pace, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on him. Quell might have lost the game, but he was far from finished, and there was something about the way he smirked that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Back on the rusty nebula, Arlo was already plotting their next move. "So where to now, fearless leader?" he asked, flicking switches like a space-age DJ. Nix didn't hesitate. "We've stirred the pot enough. Let's see if we can't lay low until the Empire's too busy choking on its own mess to worry about us." "Low profile. That's not really our style," Trekka grunted, checking the readouts with a military efficiency. "Think of it as an extended vacation," Nix replied. "Somewhere warm with plenty of drinks that aren't trying to kill us." Arlo chuckled, spinning in his chair. "Vacation, huh? I hear Ravana's lovely this time of year, provided you like sandstorms and existential dread." "Pass," Nix said, settling into his seat as the engines roared to life. The feel of the ship beneath him was a comfort, a reminder that even in this chaotic galaxy, some things remained reliable. "I'm thinking somewhere a little less imperial." As the ship lifted off, leaving the quantum flush and its misery behind, Nix allowed himself a rare moment of peace. They'd won a battle, sure, but the war was far from over. The Empire wasn't just going to roll over because a few credits went missing. They'd come back with a vengeance, and that meant staying one step ahead. "So what's the plan?" Arlo asked, his fingers dancing over the console with the precision of a concert pianist. "The plan is to not get killed," Nix replied, watching the stars streak past as they hit hyperspace. Beyond that, I'm open to suggestions. Trekka snorted, a sound that was almost a laugh if you listened hard enough. If we get killed, I'm blaming you. Standard operating procedure, Arlo quipped, not missing a beat. Back in the guts of the Empire, Zerquel was nursing a bruised ego and a glass of something that looked suspiciously like battery acid. His eyes, cold and calculating, were fixed on the screen before him. The financial chaos that Arlo had unleashed was spreading like wildfire, and the higher-ups were getting antsy. Vang and his merry band of misfits, Quell muttered, swirling his drink like it held the answers he sought. They think they've won. In truth, Nix and his crew had done the impossible, toppled a part of the Empire's stranglehold, even if just temporarily. The warlords, those opportunistic vultures, were circling, ready to swoop in and pick the bones clean. For once, humanity wasn't just the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with. The irony wasn't lost on Quell. The idea that a group of rebels, gamblers, and hackers could throw such a wrench into the works was laughable. But here they were, causing headaches that no amount of Empire muscle could massage away. He tapped a command into his console, sending orders to his subordinates, orders that would set a new plan in motion. The Empire hadn't lasted this long by being stupid, and Quell wasn't about to let a little hiccup derail his ambitions. Meanwhile, aboard the Rusty Nebula, Nix was contemplating their next steps. They'd bought themselves some time, but time was a tricky commodity. It moved fast and had a nasty habit of running out when you needed it most. "We'll need supplies," Nix said, breaking the silence. "Fuel, food, maybe a few new faces who don't mind getting their hands dirty." Arlo nodded, flipping through a list of potential ports. "I know a guy on Kessel Prime. He owes me a favor, something about a gambling debt and a very persuasive poker face." "Persuasion," Trekka remarked, "like the time you convinced that bounty hunter to take up farming instead." "Hey, he was tired of the chase," Arlo defended, grinning. "Besides, his tomatoes are thriving." The ship cruised through the void, a small speck in the vastness of space, yet significant in the chaos it had caused. For a brief moment, Nix allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd pulled off the impossible. But it was never that simple. The galaxy was a fickle place, and peace was just a pause between storms. The real question was whether they could ride the next wave or if it'd crash over them like a tsunami of imperial wrath. "We keep moving," Nix said finally, his voice steady despite the tumultuous thoughts. "Keep them guessing, keep them on their toes." Arlo smirked, his eyes glinting with mischief. "And when they catch up," Nix shrugged, his expression a mix of determination and resignation, "then we make sure they regret ever trying." In the swirling chaos of uncertainty and danger, one thing was clear. Nix and his crew weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a chance to live as they chose, without the Empire's boot on their necks. And with the warlords taking advantage, the Empire had bigger problems than a handful of rebels in a rusty old ship. The galaxy was shifting, the balance of power tipping in ways that no one had predicted. Maybe, just maybe, humanity could carve out its own niche in the stars, a place where they didn't just survive, they thrived. "Here's to the underdogs," Arlo toasted again, raising his imaginary glass. Nix joined in, the stars stretching endlessly before them, full of potential and peril in equal measure. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together, a ragtag crew with more guts than sense, and sometimes that was enough. With the engines humming and the universe at their fingertips, the Rusty Nebula forged onward, a beacon of defiance in a galaxy that had forgotten how tenacious humanity could be when pushed to the brink. As they raced towards the next chapter of their rebellion, Nix knew one thing for sure. The game was far from over, but they'd play it on their terms. The Rusty Nebula cruised through the abyss, a ship as subtle as a sledgehammer but twice as reliable. Inside, Nix Vang sat in the cockpit, staring at the blinking lights on the console as if they held the secrets to the universe. Spoiler, they didn't. Arlo in glee popped up beside him, a smirk plastered on his face like it was going out of style. "So, how's it feel being the galaxy's most wanted tonight? Like wearing a really itchy sweater," Nix replied. "It's comforting to know what I'm worth these days is basically a rounding error in the Empire's budget." "Hey, don't sell yourself short," Arlo quipped. "You're worth at least 2 or 3 overpaid bureaucrats and a month's supply of their fancy imported coffee." Trekka the Unyielding stood in the corner, arms crossed like they were welded that way. He didn't say much, but when he did, it was the kind of practical wisdom that made you wish he'd just shut up and let you enjoy your ignorance. "The Empire won't let this slide. We've managed to piss off the wrong people." "No, Trekka," Nix retorted, "we pissed off the right people. Or did you miss the memo on how this whole rebellion thing works?" Arlo leaned back in his chair, twirling a pencil between his fingers. "The Dyson swarm's a mess right now. We've sparked something big, Nix. Feels like we're finally playing on our terms." Nix grimaced. "Terms? We're making this up as we go along, Arlo. Best laid plans and all that jazz." Arlo chuckled. "The ancient Earth music where people just made noise and pretended it was art." "Exactly," Nix said dryly. "We're the jazz of rebellion, chaotic, loud, and mostly improvised." Trekka grunted, which in Trekka speak was practically a standing ovation. "At least the warlords are stepping up." "Empire's got bigger problems now than us." "True," Nix agreed, "but we poked the beast. When it wakes up, it's gonna be hangry." The ship hummed along, stars zipping past like they had somewhere more important to be. The weight of what they'd done was settling in, an uncomfortable reminder that even victories come with their own brand of trouble. Arlo broke the silence, his voice a notch more serious. "You think the swarm will hold?" Nix shrugged. "Depends on whether the warlords can keep their egos in check long enough to realize they're stronger together than apart. But ask me again next week. I hear my crystal ball's coming in the mail." "Optimistic," Trekka noted, his monotone cutting through the air like a blade. "Hey, someone's got to be," Arlo replied. "Can't all be doom and gloom, or we might as well start selling tickets to our own funeral." Nix chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. "We've given humanity a shot. An actual chance to stand toe-to-toe with the Empire and maybe even win. So what now?" Arlo asked. "We just keep poking the bear until it rolls over. More like we keep it distracted while we build something that'll actually stand when the dust settles," Nix said. "There's a power vacuum, and we're the vacuum salesmen of the galaxy. Buy now and get a free set of steak knives," Arlo added, injecting some levity into the conversation. Trekka looked at both of them, his expression unreadable. "And if we fail," Nix sighed, rubbing his temples as if he could massage away the tension, "then we go down swinging. Better to die on our feet than live on our knees." "Classic," Arlo said. "I think you owe that one to some old Earth movie." "Probably," Nix admitted. "It's hard to keep track of who said what when most of your history's been erased by the same empire you're fighting." "Fair point," Arlo conceded, his gaze drifting to the stars. "Guess it's up to us to make some new history." The rusty nebula continued its journey, a defiant speck in the cosmos. They weren't heroes, not by a long shot. Heroes were the ones who didn't make it out alive. But maybe, just maybe, they could be something more, something that didn't end with them being another statistic in the Empire's ever-growing ledger of casualties. Back on the Empire's turf, Zerk Quell was having a grand old time trying not to strangle the incompetence out of his subordinates. The chaos from the financial hacking had spread like wildfire, and damage control was about as effective as throwing a bucket of water at a burning building. Quell fumed, his patience worn thinner than cheap spacer boots. "So what you're telling me," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "is that not only have we lost control of a sizable chunk of our credits, but now we've got a bunch of warlords thinking they're kings of the galaxy." One of his aides, a young officer with more ambition than sense, stammered out a response. "Sir, we're doing everything we can to what?" Quell snapped. "To make me the laughingstock of the entire Imperial fleet. Because if that's your goal, you're doing a bang-up job. The officer went silent, which was probably the smartest thing he'd done all day. Quell waved him off, turning back to his console. The human rebels had become more than just a thorn in his side. They were a full-blown existential crisis for the Empire. And if there was one thing the Empire hated, it was admitting that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as invincible as they thought. Meanwhile, aboard the Rusty Nebula, Nix was contemplating their next move. The galaxy was a big place, but not big enough to hide from the Empire forever. They'd need allies, resources, and a plan that didn't rely on sheer dumb luck to pull off. "Think we'll find any friendly faces out there?" Arlo asked, his tone light despite the gravity of the situation. "Friendly? In this galaxy?" Nick snorted. "The last time I met someone friendly, they tried to sell me a bridge on Tarsus 9. "Good point," Arlo said. "Maybe we should try not to get swindled this time." "Swindled?" Trekka chimed in. "That's just Tuesday." Nix leaned back, his mind churning with possibilities and pitfalls. They'd started something, but finishing it would require more than just a few lucky breaks and clever tricks. They needed a way to unite the swarm, to turn chaos into order without losing what made them human in the process. "We need to think big," Nix said, his voice carrying an edge of determination. "Bigger than we've ever thought before." Arlo nodded, his fingers tapping out a rhythm on the console. "Go big or go home, right? And since we don't really have a home, we make one," Trekka finished, his eyes meeting Nix's with a rare flicker of agreement. The Rusty Nebula sailed on, its crew united by a cause bigger than themselves. They were rebels, outlaws, and dreamers, all bound by the simple truth that life was a rigged game, and they were done playing by someone else's rules. As the ship drifted through the void, Nix realized that despite the odds, despite the dangers and the setbacks, they'd achieved something remarkable. They'd given humanity a place among the stars, a voice that refused to be silenced. "So what's next on the agenda?" Arlo asked, ever the optimist. "We keep fighting," Nix replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "For a galaxy where we don't just survive but thrive." It was a bold claim, one that bordered on reckless, but it was the only path forward. The Empire wouldn't back down, and neither would they. The battle lines were drawn, and they'd fight tooth and nail for every inch of ground. With the warlords vying for power and the Empire reeling from its latest blow, the Dyson swarm had transformed into a battleground of ideologies and ambitions. It was a pressure cooker ready to explode, and Nix and his crew were at the heart of the storm. But they weren't afraid. Fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. Instead, they embraced the chaos, the uncertainty, and the sheer audacity of their struggle. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be human, to stand against impossible odds and refuse to back down. "Here's to the underdogs," Arlo toasted once more, raising his imaginary glass with a grin. Nix and Trekka joined in, their spirits buoyed by the promise of what lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it belonged to them. As the Rusty Nebula forged onward, a symbol of defiance in a galaxy that had written them off, Nix knew that whatever challenges awaited, they'd face them together. They were more than just a crew. They were a family, bound by a shared purpose and an unyielding desire to shape their own destiny. And with the stars as their guide, they set out to change the game one move at a time, determined to prove that humanity was more than just an afterthought in the grand cosmic design. Because in the end, they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future where they could finally be free.